Welcome to the Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Tuesday, September the 22nd, 2020. On this edition of the Politicrat, it's National Voter Registration Day. Plus, a look again at RBG, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, as remembered by Nina Totenberg. The stakes are high in this election, and your life and your health are on the ballot. Plus, some sound from Dr. Fauci and Dr. Sanjay Gupta on health and coronavirus, plus a conversation with Christiane Amanpour and former U.S. Attorney General Loretta Lynch. A very important edition of the Politicrat is coming up next. Welcome back. What's your state of mind? How are you feeling? Have you made a plan to vote? Are you going to vote? Have you checked your voter registration? Have you indeed registered to vote? Today is National Voter Registration Day here in the United States. So there is a feverish effort, because it really should be just that, if not even more, to make sure that everybody is registered to vote. You can go to any number of websites that have opportunities for you to check your voter registration or to register to vote. As I have often said, I have a list that I have put together of every one of the 50 states' voting registration sites, particularly as they are tied to the secretaries of state in each of those states. All 50 of them, plus the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. That list that I have created is pinned to my Twitter page as a pinned tweet at the Popcorn REEL. This list is updated with all kinds of additional information useful to voters in every state on a daily basis. So on this National Voter Registration Day here in America, it is imperative that you check your voter registration. And if you have not registered to vote, make sure you do so right now. Do not delay. Do not procrastinate. Do not hesitate. Now is the time to register to vote and to check your voter registration. And if you are checking your voter registration, be sure to do so weekly, if not daily. And vote early. As you've heard me say very often here, if you vote early, you will see a change in the White House come January. You will see different occupants in the White House come January 20th, 2021. This election is really about whether or not you want a country. Do you want a country or do you not want one? That is really the question that you will have to ask yourself, among other questions. But that question is one of the more paramount questions of this upcoming election. We have exactly 42 voting days until Election Day. That's exactly 6 weeks. So it is paramount that you vote right now. Do not wait. Early voting is going to be the key in this election. You can vote in person or you can vote by mail. If you choose to vote by mail, make sure that you fill out your ballot very carefully. Make sure that you sign your ballot. In places like North Carolina, make sure that you fill out your entire address. There have been stories out of North Carolina, one voter that I listened to on the radio who called into a radio show and said, actually called into Joe Madison's show and told him that she had forgotten to write out her address in full. And because she did that, she was not able to have her ballot counted. States are very, very strict. And with the millions of ballots that they will be counting that have come in through the mail, there will be people who will be looking to lighten their load in terms of counting, and they will go through every one of these ballots. And if there is a discrepancy, if you fail to fill out the entire address, if you fail to properly sign your ballot, if you haven't signed it at all, these are the things that will get your ballot disqualified. In the liner notes of this episode, you will find a link to a very important article by Grace Panetta. That article talks about the 5 most common mistakes that voters who do vote by mail ballots make. The most common mistakes made. That article talks about them and talks about what you can do to make sure that you don't make those mistakes. So I will be linking to that very important article by Grace Panetta. It's in the Business Insider. You will find a link to it in the liner notes of this episode. This is a very, very important election. And election day is going on now. I mean, this is election day. It's been going on since the 4th of this month. And we will have more states voting coming up by the end of this week. And I will continue to update you on those. But right now, New York is voting. Idaho is voting. We have Virginia voting. North Carolina voting, Pennsylvania voting, Wisconsin voting. Minnesota is voting, Vermont is voting, Wyoming is voting. We have all of these states and more voting. South Dakota is voting at the moment. So some of these states are voting in person, some of them are voting by mail. But this is election month, election 2 months. I mean, that is really the reality of where we are. So be careful and make sure you follow the voting rules of your state. My list that I mentioned earlier has links to every one of the secretaries of state or the election commission that exist, the election commissions that exist in these states. So I want you to understand that it's very important that you follow those rules. And that's why right now is the time to orient yourself to the rules of your state, to be aware of what those are. A lot of people do not know what the voting rules are in their state. And if you're someone who's used to voting and you do it the right way and you've never had trouble, fair enough. What I think you should do is educate people that you know who may not be aware. You really should take it upon yourself to turn around and talk to your friends and family and let them know. You really can't keep this information to yourself. Now is the time to spread the accurate information. And one of the things that I am doing here, and I intend to continue to do, is give you the accurate information. It's coming directly from Secretaries of State. And there will be some guests coming up this week, one of whom will be a Secretary of State of one of the states. And I can tell you that that person will be on, I don't want to say who it is at the moment, but you will be hearing from one of the Secretaries of State in this country. So please stay tuned to this podcast. That's coming up later this week. This election means so much. And in a few moments, I'm going to talk a bit about what really is at stake. Coming up next. Welcome back. The stakes could not be higher. I know that you've heard that before, but the stakes really could not be any higher in this coming election, this ongoing election that's been going on since September the 4th. Election day goes from September 4th through November 3rd. That's right. It is a 2-month election day. And that is the mentality that you should have. And the mentality that you should have is to vote right now, as we are on September 22nd, and this is National Voter Registration Day. I just want to underline again, and I'm sure that you are aware of this, but there are people who may not be, and you should talk to them. Right now is the time to act, to vote, to educate people and get them out there to vote as well. You can text them, call them, email them, whatever it might be, social media them. I would urge you to, if you can and if you are up to it, to FaceTime people, to Facebook people, to hold Zoom meetings and get people on the conference and tell and emphasize the importance of voting. I'm going to continue to do that myself, and I have been doing it. For those of you who have Periscope on Twitter, or for those of you who have Twitter, for those of you who have Instagram, for those of you who have Facebook or YouTube, I have over the last few weeks been doing these events where impromptu I will have a 5 or 10 minute session, literally on informing people about the importance of voting, the importance of registering to vote, the importance especially of registering to vote and early voting, and the importance of checking your voter registration. So I really do emphasize for people to pay it forward, to do the same thing. I'm sure there are people doing it, but it's important that we bring out the vote and have as many people as possible who are registered to vote get out there and do so. There really is no excuse. This election is very, very important indeed. This is about whether or not we have a country or not. And that is not being reflected necessarily in a lot of the corporate news media coverage. Much of the corporate news media, pretty much all of it, with a very, very small exception, perhaps Chris Hayes and Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, maybe the only two people who are emphasizing that this is a bit more than just another election. But the vast majority of the corporate news media is treating this as just another election. And this is not just another election. This is about whether you want a country or not, whether you want to go back to the 1800s or not. Because Donald Trump, when he says make America great again, he is not talking about going back to the 1950s. He's talking about going back to the 1850s. And with this Supreme Court issue as well, and Mitt Romney saying that he is not going to get in the way of Mitch McConnell or Donald Trump, this becomes even more crucial for you, your family, and for your future families, from your grandkids and their kids, your kids and their kids. I mean, this is what this election is about. whether or not they're even going to have a future, whether your children are even going to have a future. That is what this is. Whether Roe v. Wade will still be law in this country. And trust me, it will not be law in this country if not only the Supreme Court pick gets on, but also if this guy in the White House is still in there and if the Republicans still control the Senate. You must vote, and you must vote for the Democrat running in every single race in your ballot. Every last one. If there's a progressive in there, then you vote for them. But optimally here with this particular election, it's got to be Democrats. We have to vote strategically. I think it's paramount. Now, you voted for someone that you've not liked. I'm sure there's been someone in your entire voting history that you have voted for who you didn't line up with on every single issue, and they did not line up with every single one of your issues. We cannot afford to be so doctrinaire and look at exactly every single thing. Just make sure that they line up with you on the most important things. And even if they don't, the choice this time around is so obvious and so clear. PBS tonight, by the way, has a documentary called Trump versus Biden. And it will also stream on PBS streaming services or Hulu or whatever. But it will definitely be on PBS tonight and on pbs.org. I think it's streaming there. That's tonight, September 22nd. It's called Trump versus Biden. But most people are very clear about who they're going to pick. There's either one or the other. There's very few undecided people in this country right now. Very, very few indeed. And I hesitate, but I won't hesitate to say it. I'm going to say it. Do not believe the polls. There's no reason for me to hesitate about that. I've been saying it for so long. Don't trust or believe the polls that you're getting and hearing on the corporate news media. You surely saw those same kinds of polls 4 years ago, and people were believing them and people were staying home. I don't think people are going to stay home this time, though. But I also would urge people to not pay any attention to these polls. I'm telling you, it's going to put you in a false state of euphoria, and it will also put you in a protracted state of stress when you see those polls change. So my real advice to you is to ignore these polls and focus on what you have to do, which means you have to get out there and early vote. We're seeing a country now that is in real jeopardy of ending. And I know that Joe Biden is not going to say that. I know that Kamala Harris is not going to say that either, quite frankly. But we are at a moment where we could literally see this country come to an end. That is not even an exaggeration. That is not said to scare people. That is the honest truth of where we presently stand here. There is no other way to just say it, but other than to just say it. This country is in severe danger of coming to an end. You have an attorney general that doesn't care about the law. You have an attorney general that is weaponizing his office and making it political. You have an attorney general who trivializes enslavement, doesn't even mention the internment camps, doesn't even mention the treatment of Native Americans, thinks that the greatest restraint other than slavery is telling people to put on a mask and stay home. First of all, nobody has told people to stay home. There's never been a national lockdown in this country during these months of this coronavirus. There has never been a national lockdown. Not in this country when it comes to coronavirus. It's never happened in 2020. That lockdown did not ever take place. There was no issuance by Donald Trump of a national lockdown. Had he done so, we would not still be seeing people die. and we still would not be in this mess. We wouldn't be. Over 200,000 people have died. And Donald Trump has said he takes no responsibility at all. If that is not an urgent reason for you to get out there and vote, then nothing is. We've seen how this country has disintegrated. Now, it's happened over a 40-year period, but we are seeing in stark, dramatic ways in 2020 just how urgent this moment is. There is no two ways about it. We literally are talking about the end of America. And if that doesn't give you any kind of pause, then you know what you can do. But to the rest of you, and to those that you know, you must convey in the most urgent ways the need to get out and vote. Roe v. Wade is literally going to be taken away. A woman not having control of her own body, control of her own thoughts, control of her own autonomy, her own right to choose. I thought these conservatives were all about, we want small government. They don't want small government. They want big government when it comes to women. They want to invade a woman's autonomy. They want to control that. That is what these Republicans/criminals want. This is the truth of the matter. This is what the Supreme Court is about. Now, the Supreme Court is not the only thing on the ballot, but it is important. What is very important is your health, your mental health, your physical health, your emotional health. And right now, Donald Trump's lawyers are in court looking to eradicate Obamacare altogether. I told you about this on yesterday's episode. They are looking to completely end Obamacare, end any kind of pre-existing condition exemptions. Obamacare guaranteed that if you had a pre-existing condition, you would still be allowed to have health insurance. Donald Trump is trying to get rid of that. No matter how many times you hear him lie to you and say, oh, we're not getting rid of pre-existing conditions. That is exactly what Donald Trump is doing. And he's doing it in court right now. And not only is he trying to get rid of protections for pre-existing conditions, he is trying to eradicate Obamacare completely, which would take between 20 and 25 million people off their health insurance. Now, in a pandemic where over 200,000 people have been killed, died from this virus at the hands of Donald Trump, getting rid of people's health care is tantamount to murder. It really is. And on November 10th, the Supreme Court of this land is going to hear arguments. November the 10th, that's just 1 week after the election. The Supreme Court in this country is going to hear arguments from lawyers in a case called California versus Texas. And that case is going to be about eliminating Obamacare. And Donald Trump wants to get the Supreme Court pick on there to decide this thing. The stakes have never been higher, folks. The stakes have never been higher. If you want to go back to the 1850s, then you know what to do. For the rest of you, if you want to make sure that this country moves forward and improves, and we push it to improve. If you want to make sure that everybody has a voice, if you want to make sure that women continue to have the right to choose, if you want to make sure that black people and people of color in general get to vote, if you want to make sure that we have education in this country, that we have people who are able to go to any school they wish, if you want to make sure that we don't see segregated water fountains again in this country, segregated restaurants, segregated theaters, church, everything else, if you want to make sure that we don't see that, you know that you have to vote Democratic. And make sure you do so in the Senate. Get rid of these Republicans who are absolutely blocking everything. They've blocked election protection bills, Mitch McConnell has. Get rid of these Republicans who are lying to you. These criminals, they're lying to you, telling you that they're going to do one thing and then they don't. We need to get a Democratic Senate that controls the proceedings and gets things passed that help the average person. We need to have a House that stays in Democratic hands. Don't forget that either. And if you can donate to people, if you have the means to donate, whether it's $1, $5, $10, or if you can donate more, whatever you can give, please donate to these candidates who are running in these key states. Jamie Harrison in South Carolina, the senator there, running for Senate against Lindsey Graham, who is the current senator of South Carolina. Whether it is in Colorado, John Hickenlooper, the Democrat running against Cory Gardner there in Colorado. Whether it is people like Sarah Gideon up in Maine, running against the current senator there, Susan Collins. Whether it is the race that is going on in North Carolina, Cal Cunningham running against Tom Tillis. Cal Cunningham is a Democrat. Donate to him. And if you are in North Carolina, vote for him. I'm going to talk in more detail about the Senate race another time. I said I was going to do it maybe today, but we've got National Voter Registration Day, plus we've got some very important conversations that you may not be aware of that went on early today that I think you really should listen to. Very important. So please, everybody, please make sure that you are aware of how high the stakes are and that you tell your friends and family as well. We've seen what this country has looked like under Donald Trump and the Republicans here in 2020. We have had a front row seat. We know we've experienced the trauma. We're still experiencing the trauma. Sleepless nights. We forget things. We don't know what's up and down anymore. There's the confusion and the gaslighting. You're in your home. You can't go out. If you go out, you've got to wear a mask and you've got to keep it on and make sure you do. And then there are people who don't want to wear a mask and they're attacking people and they're threatening people's lives. They're threatening governors. They're carrying around nooses. They're carrying around swastikas and Confederate battle flags. Do you not see that this is but a preview of what this place will look like if Donald Trump and these Republicans continue to stay in power? Do you not see this? 17-year-olds, 17-year-old white boys. He's a boy. He's 17 with an AR-15, crossing state lines, killing 2 people, shooting the arm off another. And you've got someone in the White House defending that. Defending that. You've got someone in the White House denigrating one of the most significant and important leaders that we've had here for generations in Ruth Bader Ginsburg. demeaning her family. I think if you are a decent person, you know that your vote must be with Democratic politicians. This is not even about parties. This is about having a country or not having one. This is about being on the side of decency or being on the side of disgusting and deplorable individuals. It goes even deeper than that. Are you a decent person or are you not? And I know there are people who don't care. I know that there are people who revel in, well, I'm not decent, and they don't care. Fine. But this question is not addressed to those people who have already said where they stand and who don't give a good damn about themselves, much less anyone else. This question really is addressed to people who are listening. Those of you who are listening, who are actually flirting with voting for someone who is not a Democratic politician. You have to ask yourself, what do you want for yourself and what do you want for the country? What do you want for your child or your grandchild or your niece or your nephew? Do you want them to live in a society where there's this constant violence and people who constantly are in power continuously lying to you and gaslighting you and telling you that global warming is a hoax, climate change is a hoax? Do you really want leadership telling you that? Where here in California you have orange skies for 24 hours straight and toxic air? Do you really want somebody in the White House telling you that that's not really happening? When I sat here 2 weeks ago and looked out of the window and saw nothing but orange, I took pictures of it, I tweeted them. Some of you may have seen those photos. Do you want to be better? And are you voting just for yourself? Or are you voting for yourself and the future of this country? And for those in the country who may not be able to fare as well as you might fare? This is a critical election. When I return, a really important conversation coming up next. Welcome back. So it is National Voting Registration Day, or I should say National Voter Registration Day. Whichever one of those it is, but it is National Voter Registration Day. It's very important that you check your registration and make sure you are registered to vote if you have not already registered to vote. But at the moment, right now, I want to turn my attention and yours to an important conversation that was had early this morning between the former Attorney General of this country, Loretta Lynch, and Christiane Amanpour as part of Citizen by CNN's series. Actually, it's called Citizen by CNN. And this is part of the conversation that Christiane Amanpour, who is a renowned, of course, journalist and reporter and commentator for CNN and on PBS as well, had with the former U.S. Attorney General Loretta Lynch. And it's a very important conversation. And I really would appreciate it if you listened to this.
The accepted way of doing things, a way that is designed to let all voices be heard and let everyone who has an interest in this nomination meet the nominee and come to an informed decision, is not necessarily something that the current administration has indicated that they will follow, if in fact they're trying to rush a nomination through prior to Election Day.
I want to ask you, because, this all comes up in the context of equality, rule of law, democracy, elections, as you've just mentioned. Also comes up in the summer of discontent over the uprising for racial justice. This talk is about seeking justice, trying to redress inequality in the United States. You yourself grew up in North Carolina. You experienced racism yourself. In fact, your mother tells quite an alarming story about a particular high school test you once took. Can you take that away and just tell us what you were confronted with?
I think she's actually referring to an elementary school test that I took. And as everyone who's of my age and vintage will recall, the battery of standardized tests that students go through in the U.S. At usually around fourth grade, and then around middle school, and then high school you start the testing for college. But around the fourth grade, there's a number of standardized tests you take. My mother, who was a former teacher and librarian, knew a number of people at my school and in the administration. And after I took the standardized test, I was asked to take it again. I took the test with everyone else in the room, and then about a few weeks later, I was pulled aside and said, there was some problem with the paper, it didn't get scored, and I had to take it again. And I took it in a room by myself, which I thought was just odd, but when you're in fourth grade, you believe what your teacher says. When I told my mother about this, she became more upset than I'd ever seen her, really. And she reached out to friends of hers in the administration, and they said, well, because I had scored so high on the standardized test, there was a belief that it could not have been my work. So they forced me to retake it, and I scored about 10 points higher without the distractions of the other kids. And that type of unfairness truly bothered my mother. She was an educator, she was a teacher and a librarian, and that kind of overlooking of potential talent in anyone, which was clearly based on race, particularly in North Carolina in those days, was something that went against everything that she stood for. And to link it back up to Justice Ginsburg, she also illustrated through her life what it meant like to be dismissed because of her gender. To think that Ruth Bader Ginsburg could not get a job out of law school. It's unthinkable today, but it was the norm then. To think that a young black child scoring well on a test wouldn't be celebrated at a time when schools want to have that kind of result for their children is unthinkable now, but it was very, very common when I was young. And so, we're talking about not just a justice, not just my own experience. We're talking about what is the fundamental vision of law and equality in this country. What are we going to choose? Are we going to choose to expand our society and bring equality forward for everyone? A struggle that we have been having, frankly, since the beginning of our republic. Or are we going to choose to go back to a time when people were stereotyped and diminished and pushed aside? And those are two fundamentally different views of how to use the law, because the law can be in so many ways, and it has so many ways.
And of course, it's also amid this discussion about whether there is systemic racism in the United States, or in particular elements of the public discourse. So your successor, Attorney General Barr, said in June, I think there's racism in the United States still, but I don't think that the law enforcement system is systematically racist. Well, clearly this is a huge focus, certainly in the Black Lives Matter movement, and just the ability to try to make the criminal justice system fair. What is your reaction to that statement from the Attorney General? He made it to CNN.
Yes, I did see that statement, and I think that it's very typical of individuals who, because their life has had a different path than many other people, they have not had to experience racism, they've not had to deal with systemic racism, they're not able to see it. And honestly, on a personal matter, that would be fine. But when you are the Attorney General of the United States, when you are the leader of the Department of Justice, the only cabinet agency named for an ideal that is about equality, that is about recognizing that everyone in this country does not have the same experience. I think it's honestly, it's tremendously sad, and it's a missed opportunity by the Attorney General to truly understand the people whom he is supposed to and sworn to protect. So honestly, I was quite disappointed to hear that statement coming from him, because when you sit in that chair, one of the things you learn early on is that you have to take into account the experiences of all of the people in this great country. And the reality is, all of them do not experience justice in the same way that Attorney General Barr did, growing up where he did and how he did. There are a number of people in this country, there are scores of people, even millions of people in this country, for whom justice has not been about pushing them forward. It has been about holding them back. And that's what the law has meant to them. And so to have the opportunity to use the powers of this government of ours to in fact reverse that and reach out to people and show that, yes, in fact, Black lives do matter, particularly when people have always felt the burden of law enforcement but never the benefit of law enforcement. It's a missed opportunity, and it's been consistent, honestly, for the past 4 years, and I think it has led to a great deal of the unrest that we've seen over the past few months. What I do find heartening, however, Christiane, is the unrest that we've seen over the past few months, not the violence. Let me be clear. The violence that we've seen that accompanies many of these peaceful protests is not helpful. It does not advance the message of equality, and in fact, it gives people further ammunition to push people back and keep them apart. But when people come together and share their lived experience and talk about how in this country, as great as it is, the justice system still is not serving them, that's an important message, and it has to be heard.
And just because we don't do on the one hand, on the other hand, it's important to say that all the measurements and all the polls and all the investigations show that a massive proportion, more than 90% of the protests, have gone off peacefully and that there has not been violence. So just to make that clear. I want to also ask you, because we're going to talk about racism and the election, voter suppression, and the like. One of the key issues for the American people, if not the key issue in this election, is about health. It's about COVID. It's about the management of the coronavirus crisis. As we know, 200,000 deaths plus now in the United States. It is the worst death toll in the world. I want to ask you, again, this is about what Attorney General Barr has said. Comparing COVID lockdowns to slavery, let me just read this. Putting a national lockdown, stay-at-home orders, is like house arrest. Other than slavery, which was a different kind of restraint, this is the greatest intrusion on civil liberties in American history. So I want to know what your response is. Obviously, there wasn't a national lockdown in the United States. But your response to those words and how it, deals with the idea of the greater good versus individual freedoms.
Again, just a tremendous missed opportunity by the Attorney General, and just, if you want to talk about the greatest intrusions on civil liberties, I think it's unfortunate that he places health restrictions designed to save lives and keep us safe above, for example, the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, the atrocious treatment of Native Americans throughout generations in this country. I think that those would stand far and above health restrictions designed to save our lives. And in fact, we have a way to, in fact, ensure our freedoms. Wear a mask, follow the CDC guidance, and we will all be able to engage in the freedoms that we so cherish in terms of our mobility around this country. So I frankly put no stock in that comment, to be quite honest with you. And I think if you are talking about the institution of slavery, I find it fascinating that the Attorney General recognizes the detrimental nature of slavery, but for some reason cannot see the badges and incidents that flow today in the form of systemic racism in our society. And again, I think I find it fascinating when people who have had a certain kind of background take it upon themselves to define racial issues and racism for those of us who actually lived that experience and have probably a closer view than others. So, as I said before, I don't put much stock in that statement, and I think it's unfortunate because I think people will grab onto it as an excuse to try and move away from the important health issues that we're dealing with COVID. But I think the issue of the pandemic and how we've dealt with it also exposes another issue, and it connects, again, Christiane, to the issue of systemic racism and systemic inequality in our country. The pandemic has exposed that for so many people, healthcare is a pipe dream, quite frankly. A secure job is not guaranteed, and that there are so many different lived experiences that so many people at AG Barr's level, quite frankly, choose to remain oblivious to. And it has been exposed by this pandemic. We've seen how the policy choices that we have made around healthcare have exposed us to this tremendous, tremendous tragedy. We've seen that those people that we have deemed to be essential workers before this were the most invisible workers and people in whom we did not place a great deal of value. So it really has exposed the differing way in which we value work and different lives in this country. And that's why I think that this our summer of discontent, as you call it, has been so intense. The combination of those issues, I think it has shone a light on these issues of inequality for so many people, and it has pulled people into the situation where they might have been able to say, you know, inequality is an issue that's really limited to racial minorities. It doesn't impact me. Well, the pandemic has really put everyone at the same level, and I think it is akin to the civil rights movement when we had the exposure through the press of the horrors that were happening in the South that really opened people's eyes to what it meant to be a marginalized person in our society. We are seeing that same recognition again today. A lot of it is because of the police violence that we've seen, the video of George Floyd losing his life in front of all of us, but also seeing the veil of security ripped away from so many Americans, I think has really opened a number of people's eyes. And that's why we're at a crossroads in this country. We have to choose what kind of a country do we want to be.
Okay, so one of the major, elements of that choice is rule of law. It's shoring up democracy, and it's something that, again, certainly from sitting over here in the UK and watching it from overseas, people are quite, asking quite a lot of questions about the commitment of the United States to the rule of law. And as you know, everybody knows in the United States that Attorney General Barr has been somewhat under the spotlight recently and accused in some quarters of politicizing the Justice Department. You obviously held that position for a long, long time. So let me just a couple of the things. Overriding the sentencing recommendations for President Trump's ally Roger Stone, directing federal prosecutor's office to withdraw the government case against Michael Flynn, and taking on President Trump's defense in the legal case of E. Jean Carroll, who says the president sexually assaulted her in the 90s and recently defamed her. He says, Attorney General Barr says, no, I'm not politicizing it. It's within my power to be the final arbiter, which it is, according to the rules. Do you agree that it is within his power? And are you, not happy because you're a Democrat, etc., but what do you make of the way the Justice Department is being run at the moment in this regard?
I think that one of the beauties of the Justice Department is there is a tremendous amount of power that is rested in the Office of the Attorney General and throughout the Department of Justice. And it needs to be wielded in a way that is responsible and in a way that inspires trust and respect for the rule of law. That is so easily lost. My fear is that while AG Barr may be able to look at technical rules and say, well, I'm within my rights, I'm within my power, it's not just what one does, it's how one does it. How is the Department of Justice being deployed? And if, for example, the Attorney General is going to reach into cases and have an impact, is that done across the board? I think there are a number of individuals who are languishing in prison today who would welcome the Attorney General looking at their case and saying, was this sentence too harsh? Were the mandatory minimums inappropriately applied in my case? Is there a view that there should be a more moderated or modulated way of looking at these types of crimes? But unfortunately, that's not what we are seeing. We are seeing the Attorney General deploy his power in a very focused way. And it frankly, I think there has been discussions where he's been asked, have you deployed these powers in cases where there was no connection to the president? And I don't believe that he was able to provide examples for that. But the larger issue really is, when you deploy the power of the Attorney General, are you doing it in a way that inspires trust in the Department of Justice, which is essential, and which, quite frankly, has been eroded, unfortunately? Or are you doing it in a way that makes people cynical and view it as simply a political arm, which it can never be? And that is the larger harm that is being done here. That is the larger issue that we have to face here as we decide who is going to lead the country, and by definition, who is going to lead the Department of Justice over the next 4 years. Will it be someone who views that job as one in which they work for the department and they work for the American people and need to hear all voices, or will it be someone who views it as simply an exercise of power?
So, in the words of your immediate predecessor, Attorney General Eric Holder, he called William Barr unfit for office. Do you believe that's an accurate assessment?
You know, I really don't have much comment on A.G. Barr, and I don't know if it's really helpful for me too, because I think it'll all be decided in the election. But I do think that, as I said before, one always has to be careful and cognizant of the tremendous power that resides in the chair of the Attorney General. And when you sit in that chair, the chair that decided 50 years ago to send troops to the South to protect protesters, to protect those who were fighting for civil rights, the chair that someone has sat in and decided to expand voting rights for our country, the chair in which attorney generals have sat in and decided that, you know, we need to make sure that we exercise the incredible power of prosecutions in a way that affords prosecutors discretion to hold people accountable, but also to consider everyone individually. You know, when you have that kind of power, you have to be cognizant of the consequences of that. And you have to be cognizant of the fact that people look to the Department of Justice when they have no one else to whom to turn. They look to the Department of Justice for fairness and equality in the biggest issues of the day. And you have to decide, where do you stand on those issues?
So elections generally determine, as you said, the direction of the country. There's a massive, it's more than 60% according to the latest poll, who believe the country's in the wrong direction right now. But even the election itself, the vote itself, is being undermined by the administration. President Trump has even floated the idea of having external law enforcement monitors at various, ballot boxes, etc. What is your hope or your nightmare scenario about how this election goes off and how the result will be tabulated and enshrined?
You know, I have a great deal of faith in the American people overall. And it's not to say that our systems are perfect or that this isn't a tremendously difficult time, perhaps one of the most difficult times in our democracy since the Civil War, when we were deciding, again, what kind of a country did we want to be? What ideals did we want to advance? I do think that people are focused on this election in ways in which they have not been in prior elections, and that's on every side of the political divide. I do think that voting should be open and accessible, regardless of party affiliation and regardless of whom you vote for. As a country, we need to ensure that everyone has the ability to vote easily and to vote in a way that's consistent with their beliefs. And so I think people are going to be focused on this election. I believe that they are going to be energized by the issues in this election. It has touched people's lives in ways that I've not seen really in generations. So it's beyond the issue of just, do you believe that Black Lives Matter? It's, do you believe that we all have a fundamental right to equality in this country, to fairness in this country? Do we believe that we should determine how law enforcement interacts with our citizens in this country, that we can hold people accountable and yet still have fairness in the system? And so I have tremendous faith in people, but I do think it is vital that people understand what is at stake in this election and find a way to make their voice heard at the polls. We have seen voter suppression really for generations. We've seen it since the passage of the Voting Rights Act, Christiane. Since that act was passed, there has been a concerted effort over the years to find a test case to overturn, if not the whole Voting Rights Act, salient portions of it. And that's what we saw several years ago in the Shelby County v. Holder case. Opponents fair access to the ballot had been looking for a test case for years, and they found it in Shelby County, and they were able to eliminate the pre-clearance requirements where the Department of Justice had to scrutinize changes to voting in certain states to ensure that they did not impact minorities unfairly. And as soon as the pre-clearance section was removed, we saw a raft of state-sanctioned efforts to limit voting, ranging from voter ID to limiting access to the polls. And we see that today. We can never underestimate those who do not want change and do not want to share power in our country. And we can never underestimate the means to which they will go to try and hold on to power. That is what politics is all about. And I know that everyone says I'm not political and they're not into it, but we have to assess the impact of politics on our daily lives. Everyone must determine, how do I need to vote? What do I need to do? And now is the time to do it. Do I need to get my mail-in ballot? Do it. Do it today. Do I need to make sure that my registration is up to date? Do it, and do it today. Do I need to make sure that I have a way to get to the polls with the pandemic? Figure it out, and figure it out today. Because this is the most important thing that any American ever does, is decide the fate of our country.
On that note, Attorney General Loretta Lynch, thank you so much for joining us.
I hope you found the conversation between Attorney General, the former Attorney General of this country, Loretta Lynch, and Christiane Amanpour of CNN to be of benefit, because the points that the former Attorney General was making there are critical and certainly echo the way I feel about the way that this tyrannical administration has behaved, especially the present Attorney General, Bill Barr. He is a threat to any notion of democracy. And that's the key. That's in line with what I've been saying. If you want a country that falls into dictatorship, and I think it already is there, quite frankly, but if you want this to get even worse, then you know what to do. But if you are somebody who does not want to see this get any worse, and you want to start to move back from that cliff edge, then you know what to do. You vote for Democrats up and down the ballot. Welcome back. The United States Supreme Court and the federal bench will affect our lives and our children's lives and your nieces and nephews' lives and their nieces and nephews' lives and their children's lives and your grandkids' lives. They will affect our lives for generations. The Supreme Court is a court that has lifetime appointments. Federal judges are lifetime appointments. Pretty much all of them are. There are some exceptions, but pretty much all of these federal benches, lifetime appointments. In fact, they are. They're lifetime appointments. And if you have a judge in the Supreme Court, on the Supreme Court, and that judge, or justice rather, is 45 years old, they could be on the court for 40 years. 40 years. That is a generation or two. And that affects the bulk of the lives of many people. That's why it is important to have judges on the bench who are not judges that are going to profoundly curtail your life in terms of the choices that are made about your life. And if you don't participate in the voting process because you're so jaded, you're so fed up and cynical and tired, you will wake up the next day or the next month or the next year and wonder what the hell is going on. And there are certainly understandable reasons why people may be jaded. But you do not just throw up your hands and give up. You air your frustrations, and hopefully people will listen to you. And hopefully you will also listen to those who tell you why it is important that you vote. The federal bench is an important thing because those judges are lifetime appointees, and whoever is in the White House, and if you have a Senate that is controlled by Democrats, and you have a president who represents the Democratic Party, who is from that party, what you will have is control over a process that ensures a woman's right to choose is intact, that ensures that a person's voting ability is not hampered. And these judges get sworn in at 35, 40, 45, 50 years old. And they get to stay on the federal bench 30, 35, even 40 years. And if they're 35 years old or 40 years old, that is 30 plus years. You can bet 30 to 35 years of their lives will be spent on that bench. Clarence Thomas has been on the bench in the U.S. Supreme Court for almost 30 years. The late, great Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was on the bench in the U.S. Supreme Court for 27 years. By not voting, you allow yourself to not only fall through the cracks, you allow others to vote for your future for you and to vote on your future for you, to decide whether or not you get to vote anyway, ever again. I mean, we really could have a country where that doesn't happen anymore. We could easily be one of these banana republics, because we really are that. Certainly at the moment we are. But it could get a whole lot worse. And if you thought that 2020 was stressful and traumatic and devastating and wretched, just wait until you get to 2021. If you continue to vote in Republicans and people like Donald Trump, or if you stay home, or if you decide to write a third party in, or if you vote for a third party, if you decide to write someone in who clearly is not running, if you vote for Kanye West, those are votes for Donald Trump. Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away last Friday. And I don't think she would want to even have left this world knowing that we are at a moment where we could throw away all the progress that she helped this society to make. We have had John Lewis pass away this year. And I would shudder to think what he would be thinking if he were still here. That we could literally be on the verge, and that we are on the verge, of throwing all the progress that John Lewis and Diane Nash and Coretta Scott King and Amelia Boynton and Rosa Parks and Dr. King and Ralph Abernathy and C.T. Vivian and Reverend Joseph Lowry and so many others have made. We could have all of that progress, John Lewis, or we could have that wiped away if this election does not go the way it must go, which is in favor of Democrats all the way through, from top to bottom. Do not leave any of these races blank. Do not leave any of them blank on your ballot. make sure you vote all the way down Democratic. Do not leave anything out. I've heard of people who say, well, I'm not going to vote for the White House. I'll leave it blank. Don't be foolish, please. Every vote does count, contrary to some of the popular belief that is out there among some. The reason why Donald Trump confuses things is because he doesn't want you to vote. He wants you to be frustrated. He wants you to be frustrated and just turn around and go, I throw up my hands, I give up. And some people will. There'll be a small percentage who will actually do that. This is a form of voter suppression. This is a form of voter suppression. You really could be suppressing yourself. So it really is important that if you want to preserve the legacies of people like a John Lewis, like a Ruth Bader Ginsburg, like a C.T. Vivian, like a Joseph Lowery, like an Amelia Boynton, like a Rosa Parks, then I really do suggest that you vote early and that you vote Democratic and that you tell everybody you know to do the same. Here is promised now is a conversation that is important, remembering Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the U.S. Supreme Court Justice who passed away last Friday. I am one of those who thinks that she has not received the kind of tributes and the due that she really should have, and that her work and her life and her career have certainly reflected and warranted. She will be lying in state coming up by the end of the week. She is going to be lying in repose in the court, in the Supreme Court building. And that's a really good thing that Speaker Pelosi has ensured that she will be lying in state in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol building. I think that's a very good thing. But I am not happy with the way the corporate news media have behaved in terms of covering her. There have been some very nice tributes here and there, but Ruth Bader Ginsburg is someone who really transformed this country for women, for people in general, and had a commitment to doing that. Her whole career was built on doing that, and she did it. And we must pay her the proper respects. We must do right by her and by John Lewis, and vote early and vote Democratic. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was appointed by a Democratic president named Bill Clinton. And she was confirmed to the Supreme Court, 96 votes in favor, 3 votes against. That's what the U.S. Senate did. They confirmed her, an overwhelming 96 votes for her confirmation and 3 votes against. I, by the way, am giving away a book, and I've also mentioned this on Twitter as well. So this particular giveaway that I'm doing is one that is going to be done in concurrence with Twitter on my Twitter account at @thepopcornreel. All you have to do is reply to my tweet on Ruth Bader Ginsburg's book, and you will see that tweet on my page. I'll be retweeting it again later on, but you will see it on my Twitter page at @thepopcornreel. It's @thepopcornreel, and you will see a cover of the book called My Own Words, and it's by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You will see a photo of her, an artist's rendering of her on that cover page of that book, which you will see on my Twitter page. Just simply either respond to that tweet, just reply to it, saying that you'd like a copy of the book. I'm only giving away 1 copy of the book, just 1, at random. I'll be putting your names into a pot, and I'll be picking out 1 name. That's how it's going to be done, and I will give people ample opportunity, unlike the other giveaways where it's been that day's episode only. this giveaway that I'm doing for Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's book, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's book, is going to be for a few more days here. So please go to my Twitter page at @thepopcorn REEL and make sure that you either retweet, like, or reply to my tweet on Ruth Bader Ginsburg's book, and you'll see the cover of the book. She will be on the front cover of it. It's called In My Own Words. That's the name of the book. You could be the one who gets a copy of that book sent to you free of charge in my random giveaway. Just one copy of the book by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And now, Nina Totenberg on Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was nearly a lifelong friend, had been a friend of Supreme Court Justice Ginsburg for 50 years. You'll hear right now from Nina Totenberg, who of course is on National Public Radio and on PBS as well. So listen to this fond tribute, and I'm going to also link to a wonderful story that Nina Totenberg, wrote about her friend, her late friend. This conversation that you'll be hearing happened early this morning with Anderson Cooper on Citizen by CNN.
You and your husband had a great friendship with her. Can you just talk a little bit about what she was like, kind of, when not on camera?
Well, as I, in public, she was very shy and very little. And so she seemed in an odd way like a tiny, austere person. But in fact, she was a very internalized person. And that's true. But she loved to giggle. She loved to gossip. One of the bases for her friendship with Justice Scalia, as she often said, was, he makes me laugh. And there were one of the sort of classic RBG moments was when she had to go to the hospital, I don't know, a month or two before she died, and she suddenly developed this infection, and they say to her, I'm sorry, you have to get in a car and go to Johns Hopkins, which is an hour away. And she fought them on a tooth and nail because she said she had work to do. And finally they said, you just have to. You could die from this. So she said, okay. Well, the crab cakes there are pretty good. This little person who loved to eat. And the other thing that was so interesting about her is the breadth of her intellect. It went from music to literature to the law, which she loved above all else. But I remember once I was saying to her that I had found a book in my father's library of letters from Mozart's father to Mozart, and that they were so interesting and so lively. And she said, oh, I have that book.
That's great. Well, there's also a line in your article where she, I guess it was another hospital stay, and I guess you asked her how it was, and she said, well, the consomme is better than I deserve, or better than I could expect.
Well, it was after the lung cancer surgery, and she was in the ICU with a chest tube in her, and she was sitting up in a chair, and she was calling me. I was supposed to do your show that night. P.S. I got canceled. And I was supposed to do your show that night, and I was having dinner with my husband, a quick dinner, so we could run over to CNN, and the phone rang, and it was Ruth, and she said, Nina, I'm sitting up having a consomme that is far better than you could ever expect, and I'm calling you because I wanted you to know why I forbid David, my husband, who's a doctor who had helped her for 6 weeks prepare for this, why I forbid David to tell you anything. It was because I didn't want you to be caught between your friendship for me and your obligations as a journalist. And she knew that if I knew she was having another surgery, I would have had to make a horrible choice. And, my obligation as a journalist is to tell the public something important that I know. And she figured that out and took me out of the equation.
And it said a lot about her and her friendship with you, that she wanted to protect you or not make you have to face that kind of a decision.
Right. She didn't want me to face a Hobson's choice.
Yeah. A lovely tribute indeed there by Nina Totenberg on her great, close, late friend, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We are so fortunate to have had her in this world and to have her here in this country. And she has impacted people in this country and beyond. Coming up next, a little bit more on the U.S. Supreme Court. Don't forget to call Republican senators and tell them that you, as senators, cannot put this vote through before the election. It doesn't matter whether the Republicans have the votes or not. Let them hear your voice, especially these Republican senators who are up for re-election. You need to call 202-225-3121. That's 202-225-3121. Make sure that you ask to speak to the following Republican senators. All of these Republican senators that I'm going to mention to you are up for re-election. You need to speak to Joni Ernst in Iowa. You need to speak to her, the senator out of Iowa. You need to speak to Senator Cory Gardner, the Republican in Colorado. You need to speak to Senator Tom Tillis. I know he has expressed that he will not get in the way of McConnell and Trump, but you need to call him. You need to call all of these people. Republican Senator Martha McSally out of Arizona. You need to call Susan Collins and thank her, the Republican in Maine. She has said that she will not go for a vote before the election and before someone has been seated in office in the White House. So thank Susan Collins. Even though you will be voting Susan Collins out there in Maine, be sure to place a courtesy call to Senator Collins in Maine at 202-225-3121 and say to her, thank you for standing on the right side of justice, on the right side of history. Thank her for doing that. Make sure you call up Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, even though he's already said he's not going to stand in the way of McConnell and Trump. Call him and tell him that you are going to be voting for Jamie Harrison. That's if you are down there in South Carolina. Make sure you let Lindsey Graham know that he really should not be doing what he's doing and that it's a big mistake. Again, with all of these calls, do not be mean. Do not name call. You may be passionate, you may be angry even, but that anger should not be reduced to cursing or name calling or any other nasty thing. Let your voice be heard. There are so many other Republican senators that you should call as well. I only scratched the surface of those senators who are running. And remember, to flip the Senate to Democratic control, we must win. Democrats must win 4 seats in the Senate. 4. A net gain of 4 seats. That is the difference. That will give the Democrats control of the United States Senate. And that is going to be very key for the United States Supreme Court. Welcome back. Finally, your health is on the ballot. Your life is on the ballot. Your health is on the ballot. Your children's futures are on the ballot. Your children's children's futures are on the ballot. Your country is on the ballot. The survival of America is on the ballot. Whether you want America to survive or whether you want America to die, that is all on the ballot. 200,000 people's lives are on the ballot. Coronavirus is on the ballot. And last night, Anderson Cooper, throughout his show, put up as many names as he possibly could of all of the people, of those 200,000 plus people in the United States who have died from coronavirus, and Donald Trump turning the other way and looking the other way and not caring and saying that he's not taking any responsibility for this. He said that on March the 13th, I believe it was. No, I'm not taking I don't take responsibility at all. That's what he said. That's what he said.
No, I don't take responsibility at all.
So your health is on the ballot. And with that, I want to play for you, in this last segment, a portion of a conversation held early this morning, again from Citizen by CNN, a conversation between Dr. Sanjay Gupta and Dr. Anthony Fauci, who has been indispensable to this country over these last few months, giving us all the science and all the important information that we need, giving us the facts, giving us the science that literally helps us and has helped us save lives.
The fact is, you've got to go with the scientific data. One of the things that the public needs to understand is that this is an evolving situation. And the people who say, well, how can I trust anybody because things change? What changes is the fact that we are in an evolving outbreak. And the things that we did not know a few months ago allowed us to, at the time, use the scientific information to make recommendations that were appropriate at the time because the data were telling us at the time. As we learned more, things changed. It's appropriate to make changes in recommendations based on the additional knowledge that you know. A classic example of that, Sanjay, that you know very well, is that back then, we were not aware that 40 to 45% of people were asymptomatic, nor were we aware that a substantial proportion of people who get infected from people who are without symptoms. That makes it overwhelmingly important for everyone to wear a mask. So when people say, well, why did you change your stance and why are you emphasizing masks so much now when back then you didn't? And in fact, you even said you shouldn't because there was a shortage of masks. Well, the data now are very, very clear, and that's why we have to act on the data. So we need to put that nonsense behind us about, well, they keep changing their minds. Masks work. Physical distancing works. Avoiding crowds work. Thank you, Sanjay, for giving me the opportunity to be on television now to say that. That is the fact. So people should not worry that that's wrong or worry that that's something that's going to change. This is where we are, and it's based on fact.
We are all learning together, and there's a certain amount of humility that I think needs to accompany a novel virus. I mean, it's something we really didn't know about prior, at this time last year, certainly. I do want to ask about this idea of how the virus is transmitted. People learn that someone coughs or sneezes. That's how we typically think of the virus being transmitted. It's these respiratory droplets, but they're kind of heavy. They may fall to ground or onto some surface. Can't really jump more than 6 feet or so. You could get it from surfaces potentially, but that was less likely, although possible. But now there's this conversation, I think a significant and important one, Dr. Fauci, around aerosols. This idea that the virus itself, because it is so tiny, the genetic material of the virus could sort of stay suspended in air, could linger for a long time, and could travel much further than 6 feet, especially in indoor, poorly ventilated places. the science seems like it's been pretty clear on this for a while. I went back and looked at the data last night. Even back going to June, there were some pretty significant papers written saying this can travel and infect via aerosol. The CDC seemed to agree on Friday, and then they took it down off their website yesterday. What's the truth? Can this virus travel and infect people via an aerosol, kind of like smoke in the air might travel?
Sanjay, the evidence I've seen and the conversations I've had for people who understand aerosol particle physics more than I do say that there's no doubt that what you talk about of various size particles, that they can stay in the air. Now, the question is, what is the extent, what is the contribution of aerosol, namely, so that people understand, a particle that isn't aerosolized is one that is in a large enough particle that it will essentially drop and go down to the ground before it travels for a while or hangs around in a room and recirculate. The definition of what people call aerosol means that it doesn't, because of its weight, go right down. It can hang around for a while and recirculate. So when you look at what's gone on and the evidence we've seen so far, you can assume that a component, and we don't know, and here's where you've got to be humble enough and honest enough, that we don't know the extent to which the aerosol component is contributing to transmission. You can make a reasonable assumption, Sanjay, that some aspect of transmission can be and is by aerosol. The interesting thing about that, it doesn't change anything that we've been saying. It means wear your mask. It means avoid close contact. It means avoid crowd. And it means what we've been saying, the third or fourth thing that I mentioned to you just a little while ago, is that outdoors is better than indoors. Because if you have aerosol indoor, you can have some recirculation. And there have been some case reports in the literature of situations, for example, in restaurants, where it looks like it almost had to be an aerosol spread. Whether or not that's 3%, 5%, 10% of the spread, we don't know. But in some respects, Sanjay, it doesn't matter, because the things that you want to do to avoid that, make sure there's good ventilation. When you're indoor, keeping the windows open, wearing a mask indoor. When you're outdoor, do all the things I've said. So rather than bending ourselves out of shape, trying to figure out what percentage it is or is not, or how well it's proven, make an assumption that some component of it is aerosol and act accordingly, which means do what we've been telling you to do all along. It doesn't change what we're doing.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, I think the CDC, having put that on the website and then taking it down, not mentioning aerosols at all as things stand right now, is part of the issue. Because I think, I'm glad we're clarifying this, because bottom line is that people should wear masks, because you have to assume that there could be virus potentially in the air, and you have to assume that you could potentially be carrying the virus. So all of that, I think, is an important point. But, I think, again, going back to 1918, what sort of created that huge spike in the fall, people starting to cluster indoors? So schools, Dr. Fauci, my kids, as you know, we've talked about this, started the year learning virtually. But restaurants, bars, places that are indoors where you have to take off your mask, presumably to eat or drink, if the aerosol sort of mode of transmission is possible and even likely, is it reasonable at all that those types of places should be open right now? How could you possibly keep people safe if this could be transmitted through the air the way that you just described?
Sanjay, it gets back to what I've said multiple times before, and that is, it really depends upon the level of virus in the community that you're in. And that's where I think we get a lot of pushback and concern of people think that our recommendations are being too stringent and we're interfering with people's freedom to do what they want to do or getting in the way of opening up the economy. That's not the case at all. You've got to adjust your public health measures in the context of the situation you're in. There are areas that, we call them green zones, yellow zones, red zones, and then there's even a dark green zone, which means it's really, really good when you look at the level of test positivity that's very, very low. Under those circumstances, you can have a degree of indoor restaurants, sitting down somewhat to normality, wearing masks if you can, taking them off when you eat, doing things like that. When you're in a yellow zone, you have to be a little bit more careful. You might want to have, better ventilation, distancing of chairs or what have you. When you're in a red zone, you've got to really be careful. And in fact, just go back to something that hasn't changed. When we were talking about how to open the economy, which we all want to do, you can do that through the implementation of good public health measures. Public health measures don't need to be the obstacle to opening the economy. As I've said so often, they should be the gateway and the roadway to get to opening the economy. So if you go through what we did from the White House press conferences, when we had the gateway, we had the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, all of that was dependent upon what the level of infection was in the community you're in. So if you're in a situation where the level of infection is going down, you can make the progression from one to the other to the other. If we do that carefully and abide by it in a universal way, where everybody does that, not only would you prevent these surges, but the place where you have levels, you could bring them down by doing that. And if we had done that universally, and you see what happened when we went to the surges that went up to 70,000. Our baseline was 20,000, Sanjay. We went up to about 70,000 when certain states understandably try to open up. Some did it well, some did not. The doing not led to the surge. Now we're up there, we're down to around 30 to 40,000 new cases. We've got to keep that slope coming down. And you do that by looking at where you are, in what region of the country, and acting accordingly, according to the guidelines. You know, Sanjay, that's not rocket science. It's pretty clear. But we've got to do it together. We've got to be in this together. When you have weak links in the chain and some components of society are not doing it, it just makes it very difficult for the rest. So if we want to enter the fall and the winter at a really low level, we got to start acting now to do the things that we've all been saying.
Yeah, I mean, we're almost the end of September already. So I mean, these things have to, as you point out, have to happen now. A lot of people sort of banking on the vaccine, it seems, Dr. Fauci. I mean, we don't really need to do these public health measures. The vaccine is coming. I've done a lot of reporting on this, and you've been kind enough to give me some of your time to talk about this. What strikes me is that we just don't know at all in terms of what the data is showing. And frankly, we shouldn't know because it's a blinded study. So the data really is blinded except for this independent review body. I mean, how are people making all these projections about the calendar? It's going to come out by April or by, we don't even know what the data shows yet. Am I wrong?
Right. No, you are perfectly correct, Sanjay. And I think people can have projections of what they think might happen. No one knows. The system is a double-blind, placebo-controlled system, which means that there's an independent data and safety monitoring board that has nothing to do with politics or politicians, that has nothing to do essentially with the company or the FDA or the people who are doing the trial. It's an independent group that in predetermined times looks at the data. You have one unblinded or two unblinded statisticians. They look at the data. If the data say that it has reached a predetermined state of infection, namely all of the infections in one, all of the other, or divided between the two, between placebo and vaccine group. If it looks like you don't have an answer, they'll say, thank you very much, continue the trial. If it looks like things are going badly, that more people are getting infected in one, they would say, wait a minute, you got a problem, stop the trial, it's not working. Or if it looks like, my goodness, the data really look good, that there are many more infections in the placebo group versus the vaccine group, and in fact, it has reached that point in the trial where the original design of the trial says you're good to go. You can now stop. At that point, the person who is the statistician in the Data and Safety Monitoring Board makes that known to the company, who then looks at the data and says, should I or should I not submit it to the FDA for whatever they're going to submit it with, either an emergency use authorization or directly go for a license. But today, Sanjay, nobody knows what those data are because no one has looked at them. They're blinded. Having said that, I have said that I'm cautiously optimistic from what I have seen of the preliminary studies that we did know, namely the small number that were in the phase 1 and the phase 2 trial, that I'm cautiously optimistic that we will have a positive effect. Now, I don't know when we're going to be able to say that. My projection is that it likely would be November and December. It is conceivable that it could be October. I mean, there's no doubt that that could happen. I think more likely it would be November and December. And then at that point, if one or more vaccines reaches that critical point, then the FDA will make their decision, and then we could start rolling out the vaccines. Because right now, the thing that people need to understand is that even though we don't know what works and what doesn't work, the vaccines are being produced to be ready to administer if we get a good signal that it works.
So many more questions about that. Our time is running low, Dr. Fauci, but I do want to get to a viewer question. This one comes and says, President Trump says he would give the federal government an A or a B in his handling of the pandemic response. What grade would you give the response? I know you don't like these sorts of questions, Dr. Fauci.
No, I really don't, Sanjay. They're not helpful. Take a look at the numbers and make up your own mind. I mean, we don't need a soundbite from me. Take a look at the numbers.
Well, here's another viewer question. When/what month should I get a flu shot, Dr. Fauci?
Yeah, you should get it no later than the end of October. If it's available now, you should get it now. But don't wait until any beyond October. The reason the CDC says that, and they have a good point, is that sometimes people wait because they feel, well, maybe the immunity will wane as we get into the winter, and then you wind up that flu comes and you're not protected, and you wind up getting the flu. So the CDC has always said sometime in September and October, but no later than October 31st.
And finally, just, this is a conversation that comes up in my family all the time. I always tell people, young or old, you don't want this disease. Because sometimes there is this perception, I'll just get it, I'll get through it, and then I'll be good to go, especially if I'm a young person. You don't want this disease. I mean, people, you heard even the president saying it's just elderly people with heart disease that get this. By the way, my father, who's probably watching right now, is in his late 70s and has heart disease. And it always hurts me when people say, well, just the elderly with heart disease get this, because I find it disrespectful, frankly. But it's not just them as well. Right, Dr. Fauci?
No, it's not. Well, two answers to your question. It's very disrespectful to me because I'm in my 70s. I'm like your father. I could be your father, Sanjay, but it isn't just the elderly and those with underlying conditions, because it can be serious in young people. Quantitatively, for sure, it's much, much, much less serious as a group in young individuals. But the thing we need to remember, Sanjay, that there are a number of people in our society, a substantial proportion, who have underlying conditions. And if you look at the two groups that are at risk for serious conditions, is the elderly and people at any age with underlying conditions. Underlining any age. So if you're a younger person, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and you have diabetes, obesity, hypertension, heart disease, you are in a risk category for a serious disease. And if you look at the number of Americans, and it's stunning, who have these underlying conditions, such as obesity, there are, somewhat 25, 30% of the population can fall into that. Those people who have other underlying conditions are a substantial proportion of the population. So don't just think the elderly are the problem. True, people with underlying conditions, but those are not just isolated to the elderly. There are plenty of younger people who have underlying conditions that put them at risk.
Dr. Fauci, thank you so much for your guidance through all this. We really appreciate your time and hope to speak to you soon. Thank you, sir.
Same here, Sanjay. Thank you for having me.
I hope you found that conversation to be edifying. That conversation was held earlier this morning on Citizen by CNN. Really important conversation there between Dr. Sanjay Gupta and Dr. Anthony Fauci about coronavirus, about wearing a mask, about guidelines, about understanding just how deadly this virus really is. Do not be lax. Do not relax. Do not take this virus for a joke. And put your mask on when you are in the home and you get to leave your home. As you heard there, you may have heard Dr. Fauci was even saying, wear a mask indoors. For some people, you'll have to do that. And that's some advice you should take. But what I'm saying is, if you're leaving your home, put your mask on in your home before you leave. Do not wait until you get outside to put your mask on. You really are doing yourself a disservice as well as people around you. And you don't know what particles are in the air. You just heard Dr. Fauci there say about, or you heard in the conversation, him talking about aerosol. That I mentioned this as well recently in another episode about aerosol transmission, about how this virus is transferred through particles in the air. It's an airborne virus. I mean, that's how dangerous this virus is. And we still don't know everything about it. We're still Dr. Fauci and all of these doctors who are studying this and researching this, they still don't have all the information yet. They're still learning about this virus. This virus has been around for almost a year. It started in China in December or late November, early December, mid to late December of last year. And now it's almost the end of September. It's 9 months of this. And we still don't know everything we need to know about this virus. So it would really be foolhardy for people to be walking around without a mask on and not taking the proper precautions to physically distance. Like I've said in previous episodes, if you see people who are not wearing masks, ignore them. If you see people encroaching upon you as you are waiting in line in a grocery store or somewhere else, try to move away from them. Give them a look. It doesn't have to be mean, but just make it clear that you are aware of where they are, and you just move away from them. Don't get into confrontations with people. People are on edge as it is. I know that it can be aggravating. I know that it can make you upset. I know people who tell me, I just get so angry with people who aren't wearing masks. Heck, I am too. Because they're selfish. And everybody is sacrificing except a small number of people who are willful, who choose to be ignorant, who choose to be selfish and are selfish and want to begin a confrontation. They want to start something. So please do not fall into that trap, because that way madness lies. Thank you very much for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. Make sure you're registered to vote. Early vote. I'm Omar Moore.